ability to earn millions of dollars on the basketball court. Unfortunately, writing, you rarely get paid that much, especially not scientific writing, right? But it still is a really important component of many different things that we do, particularly as a student and as you move on to looking at graduate schools or even post-bachelor type programs. Even if you're not into formal academia like your graduate school, it's going to be a really important skill for you. So I'm going to give an introduction, I'm going to give some examples, but I've structured this, we've got a kind of a smaller group, but I've structured this for a lot of feedback, questions. It's a rather short presentation, we should be done in under half an hour, and then if you have questions or anything more specific types of writing you want to talk about, then let's do that. So I'm going to start with two examples as, well, I picked two of my favorite quotes from the scientific body of literature. They're a little bit different than most scientific writing, but I want to use that as a starting point, and then we're going to talk about them as a group. And actually, I've got the attributes attributed to the bottom, but I want you to guess. Some of them, this is a very famous one, so you may be familiar with this. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. You guys know the source? This is from perhaps the most famous, maybe controversial science book ever written. Right? So that's Charles Darwin in his original version of On Origin of the Species. So, again, maybe not what you typically think of science. And I don't know if you've ever read Origin of the Species or parts of it. It was a little bit of a different approach to scientific writing, and also writing for a book in general is a little bit different than writing for some of the other things we do as scientists. So just keep that in mind. I just want you to think about that. Here's another one. I've chosen it from a book. Maybe it's a little bit biased. It seems my favorite quotes come from books rather than other sources. The magic of the microscope is not that it makes little creatures larger, but that it makes a large one smaller. We are too big for our world. The microscope takes us down from our proud and lonely immensity and makes us, for a time, fellow citizens with the great majority of living things. It lets us share with them the strange and beautiful world where a meter amounts to a mile, and yesterday was years ago. Let us shrink to the height of a moth ear mite, and then dot, 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 and goes on. So that was an introduction. The author of this is Asher E. Treat. It's this funny little book. It's about mites that live in the ears of butterflies and moths. And I mean, the topic, you think of it originally, particularly if you're not interested or prone to that sort of thing, you might look at it and say, that's really completely dull and boring. Yet by his writing, he makes it actually a worthwhile read. It's actually kind of a fun and exciting read to find out about these little mites and some of the things that are going on as they're living in the ears of these moths and butterflies. But anyway, I like that as an example. So as those two kind of talking points and maybe unusual examples of scientific writing, let's talk first generally about what makes writing good. Why did I like those quotes? When you read something that you enjoy, why do you like it? What makes it good? We're going to make a little list on the board. And then as kind of a segue then, what about scientific writing? Why is scientific writing different from many other forms of writing? So what makes good writing? What are some of the things that we need?
Clarity.
Okay, you need to be clear. Particularly in scientific writing, right? That one's fairly high on the list. In scientific writing, many of the things we're trying to do are communicate data, right? Communicate facts, communicate information about a certain small subject of research. And so if you're not clear, you're not able to present something in an orderly manner, it's going to be kind of very obvious and very difficult for your readers to get through. What else?
Needs to be relatable.
Okay. Now, I'm going to put a little star by that one. I totally agree, but I think to some extent, good writing can make subjects that maybe ordinarily you would not think would be relatable. You would say, like for instance, again, I'm an entomologist, so I'm a little bit biased, but I think if you picked up this book, you would be much more inclined to continue reading it than you would any other book on the parasites of insects, right? How many of you are reading every day about parasitology of insects? I don't do that, right? But that book, I think, made a subject that maybe at the beginning was not relatable, makes it very relatable. So maybe that's what you're talking about when writing, good writing can often make subjects kind of jump out and have you interface with them in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. So that's certainly a very good thing. And the reason I put the star there, I guess primarily that is something that can be very difficult to do, and it's kind of the high-end goal of putting everything together. So maybe just break it down. What else when you see good writing?
Makes it creative.
Now, I, again, agree to some extent, but a lot of scientific writing doesn't fall into that, right? So creative writing versus scientific writing might be a bit different thing. So let's add that to our list, but then remember that this might not be necessary, might not even be might not even be something that you want in certain types of writing. Okay, so that certainly can be an aspect of certain types. So let's just talk in general things that apply to everything.
What about like unbiased?
Okay, objective, right? So particularly in scientific, if we're going to be talking about, and again, if we're doing an opinion piece, right? If we're writing in the New Yorker about an opinion, then we certainly don't want to be objective. We maybe want to be biased because we're trying to make a point. So objective might be something that's applicable to some types of writing and not others.
It needs to be readable.
Okay, so we need to be able to read it. It needs to flow. How do we make something readable?
Grammar.
Phrase it so that people can read it and understand it.
So there are certain conventions in English and other languages also, but there are certain conventions that we use to communicate. And again, some of these are fairly specific to certain genres of writing, but others of them are fairly universal. So I put this up here. I don't know if you've come across it. This is perhaps the most famous book on writing, talking about that sort of thing. What are common terms that are misused so that we may not be as clear as we are? What are common misspellings? What are common words that are used in one way, kind of an acceptable way, and sometimes people may misuse them? So grammar, construction, all those sorts of things are really important. And this is kind of the foundation, the basic. This is the stuff that we hopefully pick up in, well, grade school up through junior high and into high school. But if you haven't, if you're still having trouble with that, that may be something that you need to spend a little bit of time on. Okay? I've got a list here. There's a link there. I can provide it for you later. It's a website from a person who talks about good writing, and she does blogs. She's writing for a number of different venues, particularly for online venues. But I think that she has a good list here of many things that are common, again, for all writing. So some of these may be more specific than what she has here. There's going to be some overlap, so let's take a look at them just very briefly. So number one, she says, good writing anticipates readers' questions. And I would not even, maybe even just to put it a little bit better, maybe this is something in the relatable. I'm not sure how that works in, but say it this way, tune for audience. You have to know who is your target audience, who is likely to be reading this, and what sort of information do you need to present to them, and what sorts of things are going to be applicable for that audience. Grounded in data, right, which we already have kind of your objective. Good writing is like good teaching, and she goes on to say that it strives to explain and make things a little bit clearer, right? So we want to take sometimes very complex things and simplify or distill them into their most important elements. Okay? Now this one's interesting. good writing tells a full story. We maybe put this under the creative there, because even if you are writing in a media that's not necessarily creative, or maybe even would be unacceptable if you wrote in a more creative style. So for creative, I often think of things that are outside of kind of the normal rules, or things that if you're looking at a creative science fiction writing or something like that, some things that are unexpected. And sometimes that can be beneficial. But in all cases, even if we're writing for a scientific journal in a very objective, matter-of-fact way, we can still tell a story. We can tell a story in a way that's going to make sense, that the reader's going to be able to follow very easy. This one is, I don't know if that's a quality of good writing, but this is maybe the most important of all of them. Like any skill, writing gets better as you do it more. So we'll get into this in a little bit, but I'm just going to leave that there for now. Number 6, she says writing is like math. And she means this in 2 ways. First, it has logic and structure, so we kind of talked about clarity and being readable there, so we covered that. And secondly, she says it's inherently teachable. And I think this is important and gives people, especially if you have trouble writing, or if maybe you're writing and you don't feel fits into any of these categories here, it gives you hope. So this is a skill. Again, you're going to come to it maybe with different backgrounds and different innate talents, but you can learn it very, very easily. So I'm kind of a basketball fan, at least that's the nature, that's most of it. Well, I did tennis when I was really young, but nobody knows, well, very few people know all the tennis stars. So basketball is at least a little bit more relatable. So I look at somebody like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, maybe Kobe Bryant, these people who are these really interesting mixes. They obviously have a lot of innate talents and abilities that they brought to the game. They worked really hard to make those better. But I look at some other people who maybe on the surface, maybe there's a different set of talents that are applicable here, but maybe on the surface are not, you wouldn't look at them and say, oh look, this is a basketball player, right? And for me, I look at people that maybe are a little bit more, I'm kind of taught that a little bit of basketball and being real competitive. But I look at people like Steve Nash. You guys familiar with Steve Nash? So he's many of you may not remember basketball, but Steve Nash was a guard. He was basically what they call a one guard, which means that he would be the one bringing down the ball, and he would be the one basically driving the tempo of the game, organizing his side of the ball and that team. So he was the one who was not quite the same as a quarterback on a football team, but something analogous to that a little bit. And he was not a great athlete. He was a good athlete, but he didn't have the physical prowess, the size, and maybe the raw power that some of these other basketball players had. My ultimate example is John Stockton, which takes me back even a little bit farther, right? John Stockton was about my height. Couldn't really, he jumped fairly high, but not for a basketball player, and he wasn't quick, but yet he was one of the most dominant one guards to play the game. So he basically was the kind of like the quarterback for his team in basketball days. So again, there may have been some innate abilities to think quickly, abilities to see what's around you and make decisions quickly. Those may have been somewhat things that they brought to it, but I think in many ways, a lot of basketball players, or anything, they bring less skills, but they end up being better than many of the people who bring the skills in because they practice. And the same thing is true of writing. If you practice your writing, you're going to get good. And you may eventually even be better than people who could naturally do many of these things without thinking about it too much. Good writing is simple, but not simplistic. Some of these, again, a little bit trite. But good writing doesn't get hung up on what's been said before, so we want to try and convey something new with our writing. And then finally, good writers aren't smug. So no matter where you are, no matter what point you are, how good you think you are, maybe how good you really are, there's always room for improvement. Okay, so now let's look at this next one. I'm going to throw it out to you guys. So how is scientific writing different than other forms of writing? We've talked already a little bit about how maybe being creative in some of the ways that we're creative in other types of writing may not be the most appropriate thing to do if we're writing something, say, for a scientific journal. So how is science writing in general? And again, science writing is a big, large group of different things. We're going to talk about some more specifically. How is science writing a little bit different than other forms of writing? So we've got some elements here. some maybe we emphasize a little bit more, right, when we're writing for scientifically, like we might, scientific audiences, we might emphasize things like clarity, objectivity. We'd still want it to be readable. And you'd be amazed, and there is actually an awful lot of not very good, mediocre writing that gets into really big journals, right? And that's because in science we're as interested about what we're trying to learn as the writing. But we can make particularly for things that we're going to be judged upon. We're talking about grant applications. We're going to talk today about personal statements. We certainly can improve those by making them a little bit better, more readable, and tuned so that they're achieving the objectives that we have for them. So what else about science writing that kind of stands out?
It's very specific.
Okay. So usually it's focused on one very specific goal. We're trying to accomplish one thing, to relate a piece of information, a set of experiments. Sometimes even if you're doing a poster, right, which is a form of scientific communication, a lot of writing goes into that. We're trying to communicate one specific thing. So I think perhaps the most important thing here, with scientific writing, we are trying to communicate information. And we're trying to communicate information in a very efficient and clear, we'll leave the clarity there, but a very efficient manner. It's one of those things that you can never tell if I misspell a word until I actually do it and I go, that's wrong. Okay, what else? The structure? Yeah, so it's really organized, and there's actually a fairly consistent form of organization for a lot of scientific writing. And you'll see versions of this outside of even like primary research papers. Outside of this, you see some of the same organization. So when you guys are assigned the primary literature, a paper to read for a class, what are the things that you see first? I've got an example up here. Right, the very first chunk of writing, you've got, of course, a title and author. After that, you have an abstract, right? Which is a short summary. And there's an art to writing abstract. I'll talk specifically about that. That can be one of the trickiest things to do. A summary of the entire document. So next we then have our introduction, right? Background information, sometimes it's called. So this is